Over 5 million people have read the Almanac of Naval.
5 million people have read the free version, and we're probably coming up on 2 million copies sold. I truly thought I was going to sell 1,000 copies, and my stretch goal was to sell 10,000 and like break even on the publishing costs.
Why choose to write the Book of Elon?
Yeah, well, I found that I have a knack for just collecting useful ideas. You know, my pithy mission for this book is 1 million Musks.
Eric Jorgenson, author of Book of Elon and Almanac of Naval. Welcome to We the Builders.
Thank you for having me.
You've sold over 5 million copies of, over 5 million people have read the Almanac of Naval.
Yeah, we give away free digital copies, and that's a little hard to track, but a rough estimate is 5 million people have read the free version, and we're probably coming up on 2 million copies sold across all the languages worldwide.
That is insane for what started as, you mentioned earlier at lunch, as a Nights and Weekends project.
Yeah, it was just, I truly thought I was going to sell 1,000 copies, and my stretch goal was to sell 10,000 and like break even on the publishing cost. I thought I was doing fan service for Naval, like diehard fans like me, and I'm still kind of surprised and amazed that it's resonated with a huge variety of people all over the world.
And you know, in an alternate universe, in some sort of parallel universe, this would have made the New York Times bestseller list, which is probably not the best metric for rating like books. This ranks what, like, is it better than 99.9% of like how most books do that end up making the list? Like, do we need to create a new list for bestsellers?
It's an extreme outlier among sales. Yeah. It would surprise people, I think, to learn how many books don't sell very many copies. Like the median outcome is like a few hundred copies, and,
Wow.
a great outcome is like 10,000. And so people use these kind of like proxies of being a bestseller or whatever as sort of an abstraction of that status. But, you know, there are very, very, very few books that have sold 1 million copies and that continue.
So if the best books do 10,000 copies max, Book of Elon has probably surpassed that in week one. You mentioned it did like, what, 20,000 copies or something?
Yeah, it was a really strong start. It's a really strong start.
But never made the list.
Yeah,
So-
I could not be less concerned about the New York Times bestseller list. that was not anywhere on my goals for doing this project.
So tell me, what was your goal? Why choose to write the Book of Elon? What is the origin story, and what do you hope to accomplish with the book?
Yeah, well, I found that I have a knack for just collecting useful ideas. Like this is a weird kind of made up genre of curation that I've like stumbled into, and I've emboldened a little bit with each book. So this is my third one. The Almanac of Naval was very kind of emergent, and just like discovering it and then seeing the response to that was like, oh my God, there's a great market for this. And then I spent a few years working on the Anthology of Balaji, which came out in 2023, which was a more niche, like tech focused. So it did not have like the global reach impact that Naval did. But the whole time I was also working towards the Book of Elon, which is like a huge project because he's so prolific and so well known. And then, you know, with all of the sort of complications around his image in 2025, it got even more, I got really focused around finding the exact kind of right shape for this book. Because my mission is to help people really see the good that he does. And I think he's, as a symbol, he's extremely powerful. As a person, he's very interesting and he's very unique. And as an entrepreneur, he's unique. And there's a lot to learn from him as an operator. But as a symbol, there's something that I think will really change in this next generation of entrepreneurs in terms of like what we aspire to, and what kind of projects we choose to take on and what we consider like possible or impossible. I think that's like the biggest shift that he represents. And, you know, my pithy mission for this book is 1 million Musks. I want, you know, nothing makes me happier than seeing this book reach the hands of like 12 to 18-year-olds, just because they have so many like path dependent life decisions in front of them, like where they go to school, how hard to try in school, what major to choose, what internships to focus on, what industries to look into, what companies to apply,
To go to
how hard
school
to
at all or not?
to go to school at all or not. Yeah. And like there's really 40-year-olds don't change their mind. as like a general rule of thumb. 40-year-olds will read the things that affirm their views. And
Mm.
there's nothing wrong with that. And that's, or the things that help them on the career path that they're already on. Fantastic. But the books that we read at 15, 16, 17, 18 tend to have this really huge, like, I could name a few of them off the top of my head. I'm sure you can too, that had this like outsized impact in sort of how you chose to live your life and who those heroes were that you look up to. And so making this book like available and accessible and getting into the hands of those future entrepreneurs and engineers that are still plotting their path, I think is going to have a huge, domino effect over how our civilization looks in 100 years. And that's kind of the time scale like that I try to think in choosing projects. Like I just find that very fulfilling.
I guess what is it about that form factor, a book, that is so timeless?
It's Lindy. I mean, it's books will outlive us in ways that the digital stuff just won't. Like I'm a huge fan of podcasts. I have a podcast. I love Twitter. I'm on Twitter all the time. X, whatever. But I know, and I've already experienced that like that effort is so ephemeral. Like it just disappears. And I've gotten great satisfaction out of capturing the magic, the timeless value that is in ephemeral mediums and turning them into our most timeless medium, which is books. And there's a sense in which books are like powered by your attention in a way that social media or video or movies are not. Like if you don't actually read a sentence, like your eyes go back to the sentence. If your brain's not processing it, you sort of, to put the book down. You can feel the progress. And there's studies that show like when you read a physical book, you have a better retention and sense of the material because you have a sense of place in the book and you recall it better. And so I think there's so many people, founders say this, but like there's still massive alpha in reading, in particular in a time when so few people are doing it and when most people are just sort of caught in the dopamine loop of the endless scroll. Like making a book that is still readable, is still finishable, is still recommendable, is still useful, and sort of matches the richness of the information that you get through a Twitter scroll. Right. So my goal is not to convey one idea in that book, but to convey all of the most useful ideas that Elon Musk has ever shared. And there should be a highlight on every page. There should be an epiphany on every page. Like that's sort of the standard that I try to reach. And the best proxy I have for that is just highlight density. It's too soon to tell for the Book of Elon, but the Almanac of Naval is in the top 100 most highlighted Kindle books of all time.
Oh, wow.
Which is like a good sign to me that I've reached that sort of richness of information density that I want to.
I guess it's going back to one of the ideas that Elon discusses in the book. Build useful things.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Be useful.
Be useful.
Yeah. How useful is this book? Like I ask myself that hundreds and hundreds of times. Like, is this sentence useful? Is this paragraph useful? Is this chapter useful? And there's a big difference between interesting and useful. And writing a book like this, so this book is about 50,000 words. It starts with millions and millions of words of source material and combing through all of that and all of the sort of public canon that Elon Musk has ever shared and honing it down. And even early versions of the manuscript are often 100,000 words, 120,000 words. And it is a painful process of like pulling out whole chapters or whole sections that are like interesting, but not useful. So, the words right on the cover. It's like Elon Musk's most useful ideas in his own words.
Can you walk me through the half a decade process of curating the book, writing the book, the elimination process, everything?
Yeah, this will sound insane and laborious, but I promise you I have fun pretty much the whole time I'm doing this. The first step is just build a giant spreadsheet of all as comprehensive as you can be about public appearances. So, Elon starts to have public appearances when he's like about 20, kind of post sale of Zip2. So mid 20s. And then, is not a ton of information through those 20 through, and then post PayPal is like a whole other thing. And then there's early Tesla, early SpaceX. And so you just build this catalog of articles and interviews and letters and all these different things that he's written. And you just go through and there's a sort of a collection process where you're just plucking out the ideas that you think are useful or interesting and like making a pile of them. And then you've got this pile of pieces and then you start organizing the pieces and sort of finding themes and finding out how they emerge and starting to organize them. And that's where it starts to feel like a jigsaw puzzle. You're kind of like, all right, which stories support which sort of ideas, and which questions have been asked about this idea, and where are they, and how do we thread those together, and how do you order the big ideas so that they flow from one to the other. And then you end up with this giant version of the manuscript, and you're like, all right, what's not useful? What is the most useful? What's interesting? What's too niche? What's a digression? What's, the 401 version where the 101 version exists and is perfectly useful. And it's a really, I don't know, it's a fun process, but it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of just like honing and refining and revisiting. And you've got to go through, I mean, we went through probably 7 or 8 major versions of the manuscript, reordering main ideas. And I have this phrase that I go through, but like, especially knowing the results of what the Almanac of Naval did, is like, books, like many other things, are on this power law. And so most efforts, like we said at the top, sell a few hundred copies. But the truly great books can sell millions and be relevant for decades. And so the phrase I repeat to myself over and over again is claw up the power law. And so like every incremental effort, the returns of going from top 10% book to top 1% are an order of magnitude. Top 1% to 10% is another order of magnitude. 10% to 100% is another order of magnitude. And those changes feel small and incremental, but you never know which detail is going to sort of make the difference between being a top 10% book versus a top 100% book versus top 1,000% book. And those are the things, the difference between a book that sells 10,000 copies or 100,000 copies that a lot of people may never even heard of versus a 1,000,000 copy book that is relevant for 30 years.
At what point in those 5 years did you realize, okay, now you made it to 10%, and then this?
You never know.
Oh, you never. Okay.
You never know.
Yeah.
Like the only thing you can do, I imagine it's something like training for the Olympics, of like, you never know if you're going to win. All you can do is know whether you're exhausting yourself and all the possibilities that you have to do the best work you can with each sort of day or opportunity in front of you along the way.
While going through the process of building that catalog of the most useful things Elon has shared in his own words, and then I guess sequencing it and writing it, what were some things you changed in your life, or what are some ideas, like if you would go have dinner with your friends that you shared with them, what are some of the most impactful things that emerged from that like you were able to take up?
I mean, one of them is simply the importance of speed and intensity, like knowing that what you thought was a 10 is actually a 3 or a 4. And that the ceiling is so much higher than you think. Like, you are capable of more than you think. This is a very generalized like takeaway. But I think Elon is kind of like the founder's version of David Goggins, which is like, when your brain is trying to give up because you think you're at your max, you're at 30% of what your body's capable of. So like, just keep going, keep moving the bar on yourself. Maybe more tactically, like the first 2 steps of the algorithm, his famous like 5-step engineering process, are question requirements and try very hard to delete the partner process. It's just a deep passion and interest for simplification. Is like a very generalizable and useful thing that most people really don't get to experience or fully integrate. And I'm, this is a few years into just starting to practice this more intentionally. But when you've had that visceral experience of like, I deleted this thing from my life and everything got better. Everything got better. Like, I thought there would be a 1-for-1 kind of like, there felt like risk in deleting it. Or I was afraid to delete it. But once it was deleted, everything was better and there was no downside. And there was actually only additional upside that I didn't expect. That is magic. That's alchemy. Like, that feels like it shouldn't happen, but it makes you really like, oh, what else can I delete? That was awesome. Like, those are some of the early ones. It also gave like, it changed what I invested in for sure. Like, we both work in kind of pre-seed and seed startup investing, and it gave me a much different appreciation for scope and scale of potential investments. Like, what the world is going to look like in 2040, 2050, and what those mega cap companies are going to look like, and how to actually, what those look like at the earliest stages. Arguably, SpaceX and Tesla are two of the most important companies in the world right now. And what they looked like in 2002 is not what most people are looking for when they look for pre-seed and seed investments these days, right?
Right.
And so I took a lot of inspiration from that, actually, and it made me be like a little more crazy and kooky and lean into these like ideas that sound to any normal person and even most investors like magic bordering on impossibility.
So in a way, writing the book inspired you to take more out there bets, I guess.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's very it's easy to forget now how out of pocket Tesla and SpaceX both seemed. They both seemed impossible and foolish and insane. And Mike Moritz, after just making a bunch of money with Elon in PayPal, passed on Tesla. But arguably the greatest venture capitalist at that time, arguably one of the greatest entrepreneurs, like A-list and A-list, with experience with each other.
Yeah,
and
made you money twice.
Yeah, and was still like, nah.
Yeah.
No, you're crazy. This is never going to work, right? That's interesting and instructive, I think, actually. So having that kind of, that's what venture capital should be to me. Like the MBA-ification of venture capital and the sort of past 2 or 3 decades of like software hyper focus, I think are one of the things that's sort of coming to an end. And I think in this cycle, like between AI and Elon and the sort of acceleration of hardware and the desire to reindustrialize, like all these things are sort of changing. And I think this cycle, startups or startup culture is coming for all the biggest markets on earth. And it's going to be a really exciting.
This is a fun time to be in startups and venture.
It's a very fun time to be in startups and venture. The sort of historical, like, well, there's only like, one $10 billion company a year that's founded, and the whole like venture industry is just like a race to get into that one. I think that's, my view is that that's outdated, and that there will be more and bigger winners over the next 25 years that come out of this tech ecosystem than there have been in the past.
I think what nobody predicted was $1 trillion IPOs.
Yeah. There's many things that we didn't predict, right? Like there are more frontiers than there have been before that are all expanding more quickly than they have been before.
I guess they're getting more attention than they've historically gotten.
Well, if internet was the only frontier for, the 20 years of like the past 25 years, like we now have space, bio, robotics, AI, like not all of those were moving at the pace that they are. And some of them are sort of self-reinforcing. I could be totally wrong on this.
No, you're right, because I did this rough math and they were undercapitalized by 10x. There's like probably close to 4 trillion went into more software enabled businesses compared to the frontiers.
Yeah. I think that's in the process of changing.
Yeah. So that is nothing else. Probably it's going to become 50-50 at least. At the very least. Yeah.
I mean, these markets are so much bigger. The fact that there are startups going into oil and gas and logistics and primary materials, like
air travel,
like the big markets, let alone the fact that there are, like, the space economy is not a thing that we really have a market cap size for yet, but is, obviously a thing that will continue to grow and exist. Exciting times ahead.
So what did you learn about what these companies look like in the earliest stages, which has given you this new lens to look at companies early?
I mean, if we just look at Elon's, like, he looked crazy and they were relatively slow moving. They looked more like slow science projects, demo kind of things for a long time. Like Tesla had a really messy first 6 years and then a really fraught, 5 to 10 years as they scaled up. Like, it was not obvious what Tesla was going to be for a very long time.
What was the common critique of Tesla in those first 6 years, and what did it look like? You're mentioning it was slow, and what did the company look like? Can you walk me through some of the early days?
Yeah, I mean, like the I think they started 2002-ish, and like the early demos were just like a jack together, like a lithium ion battery had just become sort of powerful enough to power a car. The AC propulsion guys had like put together sort of electric drivetrain, but they didn't want to commercialize it. There's this story about Elon giving Sergey Brin like a ride in a demo car, and because it was like more than 80 degrees that day, the car wouldn't go more than 10 miles an hour or something. Like, it was real janky. Their first version was they were going to stuff electric parts into a Lotus Elise, and basically take that to market. And in retrospect, he's like, that was so dumb. We should have just started with a clean sheet of paper, because, you know, we're putting a lot different amount of mass in a Lotus Elise. And so the chassis and all the parts that we thought we could just borrow design from invalidated the crash testing. And so we had to redesign the chassis. So we ended up redesigning the whole thing part by part through this sort of like interconnected domino effect of like chasing problems around, rather than being like, all right, what does a clean sheet of paper great electric car look like? And then there was this, Elon calls it a moral error, where he really wanted to control the product, but he didn't want to be CEO of the company. So he had funded it, but Martin Eberhard was the CEO. And so they had this weird like kind of tension where Elon was trying to be very involved, but Martin was trying to run the company. And they just like came to a head in, I think it was early 2008, and Elon jumped in as CEO, and Tesla was in a very tough spot there that they just barely pulled through on. But it, you know, to go 6 years of like stop and start design challenge towards something that was not obviously better anyway. Like, even once you built a great electric car, okay, there's no charging stations, there's no demand. Like, how are you going to scale? No car startups have been successful in 100 years in America. So like, where are you even going with this? So it's not like they were, you know, 1 or 2 breakthroughs away from having a better mousetrap that was going to be obviously
I think
successful.
this is also such a good reminder that frontier tech companies are multi-decade long projects, and 6 years is you're early. And, you know, potentially from here, Tesla's another 10x market cap away, right? Like, there's the whole opportunity because it's so many companies in one. You have the humanoid robotics effort, you have the autonomous robotaxi effort, right? Converting the entire existing fleet effort,
And even to make,
right?
yeah, he describes Tesla as like a series of startups, and there's a whole bunch of S curves, and some of them were like enabling, you know, like they needed to start the charger network because nobody could scale charger networks as fast, and that became a bottleneck to demand. And then insurance was the bottleneck to their e-commerce thing, so they started their own insurance.
And the charging network is like a $4-5 billion business a year now, like from licensing deals in itself. Like that could have been a startup on its own,
right? As could the insurance company,
right? Exactly.
And then autonomous driving is like, he's like, there's, you know, one of the two main things: electrification and autonomy. Like, so these are both.
I actually think that is in the very early innings. They have massive upside in, you know, becoming a monopoly in that space as well. They could 100% do licensing deals with basically every other car company out there because they're so far behind.
Yeah, I mean, they could absolutely, you know, they could crush Uber.
Yeah,
they like, it'll be a very interesting next few years. I think Tesla is on track to be either Tesla or SpaceX, or both could become the biggest companies on Earth.
And what I find really interesting is that, you know, you mentioned Tesla is starting 2002, the first 6 years to look like things are not coming together. You know, they're trying these different things, and they had to build these different businesses from scratch within the company for their main product at the time to work. And we're sitting here 24 something years later, and we're still talking about how many of their efforts are in the early innings and have a 10-20 exponential from here. What do you think makes the DNA of these companies so unique that they're able to reinvent themselves every few years, not even every decade? Decade seems like Tesla years or SpaceX years, 3 years feel like a decade.
Yeah.
And like people you would talk to there like would describe them the same way. So I'm just curious, what from studying so deeply, you know, the DNA of all these Elon companies, what do you think is different?
Elon had an interesting, I think it was on Cheeky Pint recently. He's like, 5 years feels like infinity time to me, which I thought was a really interesting way. Like, he's like, I don't know how to predict what we'll be doing in 5 years because everything's moving so quickly and companies are sort of reborn anew so quickly. I think in some ways Elon is very overrated and in some ways he's underrated. And I think in terms of uh we ascribe to him more things than he personally did, right? Like in the
Mm.
I'm sure I do it in this book without necessarily knowing, but like many decisions made by really smart engineers or team members, we sort of ascribe to Elon as like his unique brilliance.
Yeah.
But the thing that you're sort of getting at, I think, is like as a catalyst and like guardian of the culture of the companies, why is Tesla so fast moving? Why is it so high agency about solving like adjacent problems? Why is its sort of metabolism of itself so high? Why does it have such high standards? Why does it drive costs down rather than margins up? Like, I think all of those things come from the example that he sets and the standards that he holds. And so I think as a like cultural catalyst and sort of guardian of the customer's best intent and the ultimate vision that everyone is working towards, I think that's where he's still underrated, honestly.
Hmm. So he's figured out. Okay, so he's probably one of the best cultural, corporate cultural revolutionaries, um, of our era. But like we attribute less of that to him. Is
Yeah, like I
yeah,
don't think anyone would say he's like a master of company culture, right?
right.
Like
People are also very divided on it and split on it because
or whether it's a good culture or not,
right,
right?
yeah,
It is objectively an effective culture,
right,
right? And
yeah.
so just through the lens of these are some of the most effective organizations on the planet, what culture do they have and who's responsible for them? I don't think it's up for too much debate that that is downstream largely of Elon, right?
Mm,
And that through that lens, like you can argue whether someone should or should not work 100 hours a week. It's nobody's
mm.
business except the person who's working 100 hours a week. But that is where he collects those people and creates the culture that makes the most effective use of them. And he's built over many decades the reputation that allows him to attract those people, get the most out of them, have them hold each other accountable, and create all these sort of self-reinforcing cultural norms that makes this insane amount of progress possible.
Another thing that is very interesting is he brought up this idea that I think that he gets asked this question: why don't you do more philanthropy in the traditional way that most people think about philanthropy? And he says, well, you know, companies in a way are companies are philanthropy.
Mhm.
And if there is a way to fix something in the market system, you should fix it in the market system. And I guess like that goes to show in how um, resources are redirected within the umbrella of Elon companies or Musk Industries. You have these you have these alpha teams that switch between, oh, okay, the alpha team and they might have no titles, they might have like it's just an alpha team, right? They're probably nowhere in the hierarchy, but they float.
Yeah,
They're
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 working on the bottleneck.
they're working on the bottleneck. They're the group of whatever 20, 25 people. It happened with the Twitter X acquisition as well.
Yeah.
People from Tesla, SpaceX move in, occupy Twitter headquarters. They're figuring out like what's going on here and going through every single like hire, and they're figuring out like how many we should retain, how many we have to let go. And it that was another pivotal moment in how technology companies operate and probably kickstarted this entire restructuring of, like Square, like for example, it led to Square recently laying off 40% of their uh, employees, and it has probably led to Mark Zuckerberg in in many ways get red pilled, and he's like, oh, we need to do things differently, move faster, like reprioritize faster. It just completely like I singularly probably responsible for a ripple effect in the entire industry. But it can probably be traced back to this. You have these alpha teams moving around in the company who fix problems across Musk Industries.
Yeah, I use the in my introduction to it. I think to the book I wrote, like it's like he's running 2-minute miles, like twice at the same time, which I think is a decent metaphor, right? Because Steve Prefontaine ran the first 4-minute mile, and all of a sudden, this thing that was thought to be a physical human impossibility, all of a sudden everybody can run a 4-minute mile. And I think Elon has this knack for like achieving the thing that we all sort of ascribed impossibility to. And he has this knack for being like, no, it's if it's not against the laws of physics, it's not impossible. So keep trying until you figure it out. Could you run Twitter with 10 people? I don't know. Let's find out. It's not actually 10 people, but like 1%.
70% less. So it's
I think
incredible.
A few cuts of 70%.
Yeah.
And so like, I think they maybe bounced off like 10% or less of the headcount that they had been at previously. And of course, everyone in the press and headlines, like the whole thing's going to come crumbling down. It's never going to work. You know, Musk is an idiot, even though everything else he's ever done worked. But like, you notice there's like this dysmorphia of the present where like, I've had many of these conversations where we'll sit here and talk about how genius the last 25 years of all of his work is and how he's sort of continued to do the impossible. And then as you shift to sort of evaluate the next claims that he's making, that, you know, the Tesla Optimus humanoid robot is going to be the, you know, maybe the single biggest product ever, and that we're going to have orbital data centers and mass drivers on the moon. You're like, oh, but that's crazy. That'll never happen. And just like, what, based on what, right?
If you said it 20 years ago, it was still believable, but now based on what?
Yeah, all the historical things are a miracle, and all the future things are farcical. And like, you have so many of those conversations with people. It's hilarious.
But this concept of companies or philanthropy is still very interesting to me. Most of his companies have turned out to be one of the biggest wealth creation events, like 2 of the top 10 companies in the world, likely with the SpaceX IPO, like that's looming. And combined, possibly that could be the most valuable venture in the world. And the kind of, and there's, I think I read somewhere recently that Tesla invested $2 billion in SpaceX. And so it's not just human resources that are, migrated across, it's also financial resourcing. Or reallocation across like these different companies to resource them better. And I guess that goes back to his DNA, and he makes 180 million, I think you mentioned in the book, from the PayPal exit, and not by choice. Like he was supposed to allocate half of it to
Plan A was
Plan
to
A
invest
was
100 million,
not to go bankrupt. Plan A was to allocate half of it to SpaceX and Tesla, but ends up allocating all of it, right? And like the way he functions is, well, all in. I'm all in on something I have conviction in. And the fact that 20 years later, that continues to be the case. There's no Musk ventures. There's no like, he might do like little things on the side, but there are no side gigs, or there are no side quests, right? It becomes the main quest. Like when he got involved with even OpenAI, he wanted to be involved, right? It ends up becoming a main quest. It's not like, oh yeah, I'll like give you some money and be involved on the side. It's like this, I'm going to be a founder, and I'm going to like put in the money. It's like everything or nothing sort of a situation.
Yeah, he's sort of described by some people as he's not liking to share control. But at the same time, he's an amazing delegator, right? Like, I don't think he spends much time on the Boring Company. He didn't spend much time on Solar City. Like, he was on the board. His cousin started it. He funded it. It eventually got rolled up into bought by Tesla. So, and they do the sort of consolidation ends up when you end up with companies on the same mission. And, but the allocation of time from his point of view, I think, is almost always on the highest leverage thing. What's the single biggest problem or blocker? to, the next big goal. And like, he's just eye of Sauron on that problem. And people around him or in the companies just take care of everything else.
Mm.
It's a very unique kind of take on he's played a lot of different roles, whether it's a CEO role or the, chief product officer at Tesla or chief engineer at SpaceX or whatever. He'll like take the role because he has to
solve the problem.
To solve the problem. Yeah.
20 years later, the fact that, all resources are being consolidated into what he thinks are the biggest bets is incredible.
And to your point, the fact that he just keeps doubling down and focusing on the next S curve, like putting more resources back in, solving the next big problem. Like that's, as the richest person on earth who's like still going as hard as he is, that's incredible. Basically every other entrepreneur, certainly of his age, of his generation, is like, whatever, on a yacht and doing passion projects and on their third wife or whatever. And he's like, I'm going to keep pedal to the metal, solving the next big problem as hard and as fast as I can. I think this is how he's wired. And like, thank God, right? It's so cool. And I hope he gets, 20, 30, 50 more years, because who knows where this all goes. If it continues compounding and the level of resources and the amount of engineering talent that comes in, and there's recursive reinforcing technological progress. So like, what happens when there's a fleet of 10 million humanoid robots and like really good AI and 10x more energy generation and 10x more compute than we've had before? Like, new opportunities compound.
You mentioned delegation. That he's like, what doesn't get talked about enough is that he's also a great delegator in many aspects. SpaceX is one example where Gwen Shotwell emerged as this incredible leader on the business side and the operational side of the company. I don't know if there's one such person you could point to at Tesla.
I mean, there's a variety on the product side for sure. I mean, JB Straubel is a genius, and
engineering CTO,
the design chief design officer, is a genius, and we're with him for a long time. Tom Mueller, it's on the SpaceX side.
Andre Karpathy on the autonomy team.
Yeah, there's a lot of extremely talented people all around him all the time. And I think Tesla got a reputation for having short tenures for a while, in particular on like the business side. And it's because, as he explains it, he's like, you need different teams when you're at different orders of magnitude. And, a 12 or 15 year tenure at another company while they go from 1 billion to 10 billion in sales is like considered totally normal. But Tesla went from 1 billion to 10 billion in 2 years or 3 years. And so that looks like a short tenure, which seems like a problem, but it's actually someone completing their tour of duty just extremely quickly. And so that's a generous frame on it. I think also Tesla's a very demanding environment. And, I know people who work there who absolutely work their faces off. And I know Elon is a very demanding person. And I think there's a season of people's lives where they want to go somewhere that's going to get everything possible out of them. They want to just give themselves over to that mission and be all in on it. And, miss birthdays and holidays and work 100-hour weeks and just like help achieve this incredible mission. But very few people can do that for 20 years or their full career. And that's okay. Like that is part of that culture, I think. I have I've been reading John McNeil's book, The Algorithm, who was like a president of Tesla during really critical periods. It happened to come out the exact same day as my book, actually, which is like, I didn't know until a few weeks before. It's an incredible book, and it has like a depth of story about applying the algorithm to some of those things. So I think, he among many others have been like incredible kind of assets to building that company. But again, and you could tell it in that book, there's a lot of stories that are ascribed to Elon's brilliance that were his leadership team. And that's, that's part of sort of the myth making of somebody who looms as large as Elon does. And that's, separating the symbol from the man, from the cadre of people that are actually leading these companies is like, if you want a really rational view, I think is a helpful lens.
I think going back to how you started, that Elon as a symbol to inspire the next generation is probably a more important idea
to
propagate, because then no matter what time you're listening to this interview, if you stumble upon the 2025 narrative around him, you're going to get a different version. If you go back to 2015, you get different. Every decade like a different Elon emerges, but it as a symbol to represent how to build the future. It
Yeah.
that is probably the takeaway you want
Yeah, and
from the story.
I've been accused in YouTube comments of like lionizing and hagiography and all sorts of other like reasonable takes, but it is I'm not blind to the flaws of the human.
Yeah.
But I didn't set off on a mission to write a comprehensive biography. I think Isaacson did a great job, like writing a comprehensive biography that explores the nuance of the person and his environment and his family and all of those things. Like my mission with this book was to take the best of someone and
Yeah.
make it a useful guide that feels as though he's like teaching you what he knows. That's the mission of this book. It is not to provide a comprehensive view of someone for the judgment of the reader. That's just not what I want to do.
Another thing you brought up was the demanding Tesla culture. I wonder if that's turned out to be a feature because you get fresh DNA in the company, and maybe that's that's one of the reasons why 20 years later, they managed to keep it doing all these parallel projects is because you have new teams coming in.
Yeah,
Maybe it's a feature. It's become a feature, I guess.
I think
the
it is.
company.
I mean, it is a feature that's not without downsides, right? Like,
of course.
I'm sure you turn over institutional knowledge. I'm sure
Yeah.
there are many times when people felt forced to quit that would have had many more years of great contributions. Erring on the side of firing too early is pretty rare in a culture, and so I think it's easy for that bias, which actually does drive the pace of the organization and keeps the quality bar high, to turn into like, oh, it's a negative culture, or it's a dangerous place to work, or or somebody's an asshole, instead of like almost every organization on earth fails by firing too late.
Yeah.
And that is somehow just way more accepted, like the social cost of that to the rest of the team or to the customers or anything else. And that, I think it's just a different thing. It's, it's empathy at the level of the mission, not the level of the individual. Which as humans, I think we have a little bit of a visceral reaction to, but when you see it in black and white, and when you consider, the culture and the product and the organization that's downstream of that, you're like, oh, this is just a different set of trade-offs. But as a customer and investor, like, thank God that is how they run that company, because it's how they've managed to do things that people considered impossible.
In the book, I noticed that he actually, in his later years, brings up this idea that maybe it would have been good to pause and enjoy that drink with the team, and go out for dinner, and it's because the journey is just as important as he reflects, I guess, in one of the interviews in his later years. What do you think of that?
I thought that was a little refreshing. And like, I didn't have to include that, and I did, because I think it's like for even someone as hardcore as Elon to be like, I took 0% breaks, and like I could have taken like 1 or 2% breaks. I think that's helpful. Like, if you're the kind of person who reads this and you're like, oh my God, yes, I'm going to work 25 hours a day. Like, I think it's good to know that older, more mature Elon is like, actually, like, an hour a week, you can fucking chill for a minute.
Yeah. And also the fact that he reemphasizes that the journey is way more rewarding, and focus on the journey. And I think like that was also a reminder as I listened to it. I'm more of an audiobook guy, but that was, I think, like a key takeaway in the fact that the book has useful ideas for most people who are looking to live life in any different way, because you're going to take away different things from it. And
like 9 times out of 10, this book will tell you to go more hardcore. But if you're the one person who's already 10 out of 10 hardcore and you read this and like hearing Elon be like, you just have one drink on the beach with the team when you're on a beautiful Pacific island, like engineering the future of rocket technology.
You don't have to realize that 20 years later, you can do it now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's all any of us are doing is sort of taking the pieces that work from the people on the path ahead of us and trying to internalize them and do the best we can to
reflect on the lessons they've had along the way. He talks about this idea of leading from the front lines similar to effective generals and not asking your troops to do something you wouldn't do at least a few times. And that was obviously way more common, but this is sort of brilliant in the sense that, when Model 3 was going through production hell, he goes there with this realization. I think he mentions that he's run Art of War by Sun Tzu a few times.
He's a deep student of military history. Deep.
Which I didn't actually realize until I read the book. And so he takes that he just like takes that ideology into, okay, like how do I inspire the entire how do I emphasize that, the company will not exist, like everything is dependent on like this one product working, and we're like just not we're failing on production, so like how do I do that? Okay, well, on the factory lines, this is like optics are important. I think like one of my takeaways was optics are important.
Yeah, I mean, how do you set the expectations explicitly for where the standards of hard work are as a leader? There is no way other than to demonstrate them, or at least demonstrating them is by far the most effective way. And I've interviewed employees who worked at Tesla during this time on the Model 3 production hell, and they're like, there's a hotel across the street. Like it would have taken 10 minutes. He could have just walked over there and like got a better night's sleep. And it was a very deliberate demonstration of dedication and effort and discomfort to show people what he was willing to sacrifice and what the level of dedication and intensity that he expected and how much was on the line. That there was nothing more important than continuing to sort of make progress on this production, weekly production figure in order to save the company.
And I think he goes on to add that sometimes you have to do something like that. It doesn't have to be like a long-term thing, but you do have to do it for like some periods of time.
Yeah. And back to the general thing, this is he has a lot in common with Napoleon actually. And one of Napoleon's observations was, wherever the general is, the troops fight harder. And so Napoleon's like bias to action, young Napoleon, bias to action, and the inclination to do the strategically highest risk but highest reward thing with violent execution. And to be like, I mean, Churchill did the same thing, like in taking a stunning amount of risk as like a front lines person to demonstrate like the valor and conduct expected.
It's a declaration of priority wherever the general.
It's a demonstration of priority.
Yeah. It's like a demonstration of priority wherever you're choosing to spend your time. If you have 10,000 men under you, they're going to be like, oh, that's important. So
yeah, how do you multiply the effort of the people that work with you and around you? Is like give all of yourself. And if you get 10, 20, 100% more from everybody that you work with because you pushed yourself so much harder, that is an incredible way to multiply your effectiveness and build this really unique culture.
Another thing he talks about is you can learn anything, read a lot of books, and talk to a lot of people from different backgrounds and industries.
Yeah, the learning version of you're capable of much more than you think. It is easy to forget that Elon Musk had no hardware experience and no rocket engineering background and no vehicle engineering background when he started Tesla and SpaceX. And he hired very smart people. I'm not saying he did it all by himself, but to be the leader of these companies and to learn as much as he has about manufacturing and production at space and propulsion and all these things is like learned as he went. And he learned by reading books and talking to people. And like, that is so inspiring that I think he was about 30, like, this is post Zip2, post PayPal, not a young person, like he studied engineering, studied physics and economics actually in college. So he did have a physics background and he grew up in a very engineering household. So he has some background in these things, but like to be as deep as he became in metallurgy and supply chain and Like actual rocket engineering is just a product of putting yourself in the environment where you have to learn. And the story of him setting off to learn rocket engineering is just buying all the textbooks or borrowing all the textbooks and reading them all.
I think that's like a great takeaway for the 12 to 18, 20 something year old age group you mentioned, um, who are learning to make sense of the world and how they contribute to it. And this like simple takeaway that just read books and talk to people who've done the thing. And
Maybe the meta point is I think you have an explicit, when you've lived your whole life sort of in school being taught things, you sort of have this implicit notion that if you just show up, you'll be instructed on what you need to know.
mm,
And that's maybe true in school to pass a test. And if you stay on a like relatively boring corporate thing, like if you show up at college and pick a major, they'll teach you what you need to graduate. And if you get a job at, P&G or whatever, they'll put you in a corporate training program. They'll teach you what you need in order to do the job, but you will not advance or do anything particularly unique unless you go about self-educating. Um, and the returns on educating yourself and becoming more and more unique, or educating yourself in order to get on a path that someone else wouldn't necessarily pull you along, or a path that doesn't even yet exist.
mm,
Like that is the most important kind of meta lesson, I think. Whatever you want to learn, you can. And you'll be most effective at learning whatever the thing is that you're most curious about. And you never exactly know what doors are going to kind of open or what different ways things are going to branch. Naval has a good line about this. It's just like, read what you love until you love to read. Whatever the thing is that you are most curious about or just feel like reading at the time, that's what you should be reading, because the love of reading is the most important thing. So
mm.
read junk. Like, let's just read trash, fun, whatever. There's no wrong way
Build
to
that
read or learn.
muscle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get to that point where you've built that muscle and
Yeah.
you can go from
If
there.
you're forcing
Yeah.
yourself through the great books, like, but hating it and not learning anything,
Mhm.
you're not doing yourself any favors. If you love reading sci-fi, read sci-fi until your eyes bleed, and you will have sort of constructed this like really interesting worldview, which is a big part of Elon Musk's worldview, which is like gives him this grand scope and scale that helps him make these bets with high conviction about what the future is going to look like and what it could or should look like, or what the strongest form of a product is. Like so much of what he's doing that looks visionary and unique, orbital data centers, comes from Isaac Asimov and
Did
Robert
you grow up
Heinlein
reading
and some
Isaac
of the great.
Asimov?
I read a lot of sci-fi. I'm not particularly deep in Asimov. I read Foundation,
Mm.
but I haven't read all of his.
How having worked on the book, and has that like changed the way you think about investments?
Yeah,
I-
yeah,
if- is it like are you going back to that foundation version of the world, or like the sci-fi version of the world, like more often do you find yourself doing that?
yeah. My one-liner for my fund now is investing in obsessive geniuses building utopian technologies.
Hmm.
So searching for that kind of like independent, high conviction person working on something with a technological core. Like it has to be a new breakthrough that is timely and that is going to make the world a better place, right? Like you are not going to find me in sports gambling
Mhm.
apps.
Right.
Like it just doesn't interest me. But these kind of like utopian visions of the future that increase human flourishing, right, is like where I'm at, and I find those particularly inspiring. And I think one of the things that I've seen from Elon is that the future is arriving ever faster, and things that seem impossible on sort of a linear extrapolation, or impossible on a 10-year time horizon, is actually things change that make them possible on a 10-year time horizon. And so in this particular moment in time, it feels the risk of being too early is actually low because of the recursive progress that's happening of the exponential progress that we're on. Like this is the amount of future that's arriving with every passing year goes
Mm.
up. And so the amount of possibilities go up. And so you want to be heavily over indexed technology and increasingly futuristic technology is at least my view.
How do you, in light of that, how do you make sense of this Peter Thiel um, thesis around stagnation of technology or the last like 40, 50 years or so.
I think he was. I remember the debate with Andreessen, and I remember agreeing with Andreessen the first time I heard it, and then Thiel the second time I heard it. And I think perhaps I'm over optimistic, but I feel like the things are shifting back toward. I feel like the stagnation is breaking in some
Hmm.
important ways. I think he's still right about like a lot of academic research. I Thiel is right about a lot of things. And in academia in particular, it seems like technological,
Yeah.
they're just stymied and stuck in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Um, but I think, nature finds a way, and people are sort of building really interesting paths around, like Ben Reinhardt with speculative technologies is building really interesting sort of funding paths
Hmm.
for ideas that are stuck in academia but not quite ready for venture capital, like bridging that gap. And I think more and more private investment dollars are moving towards, they're moving down technology readiness levels a little bit, and you're finding in search of yield in a crowded venture market, people are doing a little bit more risk on technology development. Things that 20 years ago would have been dismissed as a research project are now getting funded, which is great. I think that's fantastic.
So hopefully in 25 years we'll still not be talking about this.
I mean, there will always be too much stagnation, right?
Right.
Like I don't think I think the desire for progress is infinite.
Yeah.
Through God's eyes, like there will be plenty of people who think we're moving too fast, and I will understand them from an individual perspective. But
Where do you
if you
think we're
believe
moving too
progress is
fast?
I don't think we're moving too fast anywhere, but I understand why some people think we are
Right.
moving too fast.
On humanoids, Elon says that I think he brings up this point that money is just a database and the economy is goods and services. We will always have a shortage of labor.
I think that's very interesting. I don't have my head all the way wrapped around his like post scarcity economy.
Hmm.
I think it's really interesting. I mean, his kind of ideas around like if labor is the fundamental bottleneck and we invent robotic labor for zero marginal costs, like does the economy break? Does it reform around something else? Like, I don't know. He's pretty quick to leap to like universal high income. And I think it's obvious that standards of living will go up, and that the amount of that we can sort of consume and our physical comfort will go up with robotics and AI and energy abundance, and the standard of living for billions of people should raise. I don't feel confident in my ability to assess and understand like the second and third order effects of like how that affects money supply and scarcity and labor economies. I don't know. I hope he does more interviews like deeply on that.
Yeah.
Everybody seems to have a take, but like Elon and Peter Diamandis, they all the takes on that sort of feel almost religious. Like they kind of snap to an extreme, and it's very hard to like understand the sort of
a more nuanced conversation or debate around it. Yeah.
Yeah. How to like weight and evaluate the interacting sort of variables, because we're probably going to end up somewhere in a gray area.
I think I saw Naval tweet about it somewhere that this was probably 2 years. We're very early into the AI era. Is like we should be able to assemble around projects. Some version of that. He says that we should be able to assemble around projects, and everything is project driven, and uh, just on the merit of the ideas, those projects get funded, and that's you have these special interest groups that operate.
Yeah. I think that Naval has
that was like one version of it.
Yeah, Naval in a few different ways has sort of hinted at like the more fluid the economy is, the more efficient it's going to be, right? If you could perfectly match sort of like talent and team and capital and opportunity, timing, and like perfectly sort of join, progress, and disband, like on a perfect cadence, sure. And so for that, you'd want like minimal overhead in terms of like paperwork and hiring and more perfect information and all these things. I think that's a good vision. It's a nice way to view a career too in an era where like you almost certainly are not going to go work at one company for 40 years that has like slow and steady growth.
Like on careers, I mean, Elon talks about in the book that there's this idea, build useful things at the intersection of your interest plus talent. Um, what would be a great takeaway for people who are, they could be, younger in the age group you described, 12 to 18-year-olds, or they could be probably in their late 20s or 30s, and they're thinking, oh, wait, we're not, we did whatever we did for whatever reason. And
Yeah.
we're at this inflection point where we realize that we would be more fulfilled doing something else. We should probably reinvent ourselves. We should look at where our interests are. I think most people end up doing one or the other. If you only pursue your interests, you usually don't. If you're not pursuing that Venn diagram of talent, what you can get paid for versus and your interest, you don't get paid for it, right?
Yeah.
So there's that part. And then the other is like maybe you're just naturally talented and gifted to do something, but maybe you're not as interested and you make a lot of money doing it, but it doesn't interest you as much. And so that's the other extreme. Um, so what would be, yeah, what's your takeaway for how people should think about it?
I mean, I think it is a great goal to go for.
Yeah.
I think you kind of pick one and get stubborn on it, and the others ones will resolve over time. It tends to be like if you are really talented about something, you find yourself on the track. Some people just get really interested in it. Their talent determines their interest because their status is downstream of talent,
Mm,
right? And so they discover that they have a real knack for, I don't know, selling mortgages, and
right.
like their 12-year-old self never would have thought selling mortgages, but it turns out if you're 24 and you're good at selling mortgages, you make a lot of money and that gives you status. And so you like get really nerdy about mortgages and now you're really interested in it. And that leads to like an amazing career that seems niche to others, but you find it really fulfilling and interesting. So sometimes you have to give them sort of time to catch up with each other. Maybe you're really interested in painting, but you fucking suck at it. But like if you are really interested in it, you'll stick with it long enough that you'll become talented in it and then you'll become able to get paid doing it.
Mm,
So just you'll sort of authentically like let that match up. I would say the only like true north rule to hold on to there is just don't delude yourself about it for a long time. Um, if you're lying to yourself and you know it,
mm,
that will catch up with you. Whether it's about talent or interest or something else, right? Just because life is short and I just wouldn't let like laziness get in the way of
mm.
a good life or delusion, sort of a wishful thinking.
What does this illusion look like? In what forms and shapes does it usually show up?
The delusion?
Yeah. Have you been a victim of it?
What the meme of it is probably like, I'm really passionate about using data to drive operational business improvements. Like LinkedIn is full of delusion, right?
Right.
Of people sort of performatively loving something that seems impossible for a human to authentically love.
Mhm. Interesting. Oh, so you're thinking in that sense,
I think
or yeah.
there's a lot of maybe another one is like people who are like, well, I don't love where I work, but I love who I work with.
Hmm.
I love my team.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, is that your way of saying that you don't like what you do or who you do it for?
Yeah.
Like, if the best thing about your job is the people at it, not the role that you're doing, like, are
Mm,
you just there because it's a social thing?
mm,
Um, and this is a difficult thing because you have to run the kind of explore, exploit thing. And if you don't have data to sort of compare against, if you've only ever had one job, is your job a 7 out of 10 or a 3 out of 10? It's actually hard to know. And the grass always seems greener to some people. Um, you sort of grow into or out of different environments and things over time. The algorithm is probably just don't underexplore. What's the secretary rule is like, you
mm,
interview 30 secretaries and then hire the new first best one. You can't have 30 jobs,
yeah.
but in a traditional sense, but you can shadow and visit and experiment and side project
Yeah.
and do a tour of duty, and like there's a lot of ways to sort of sample things that you don't actually hear people do very often. Like if you ask people
Yeah.
how they got to their job, it's like, I don't know,
Yeah.
I applied to 20 and this one hired me and now I've been here for 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's actually not a very high effort way to determine how
No.
you spend
Yeah.
a huge percentage of your life.
Utilizing your nights and weekends better to shadow again, like going
Yeah.
back to the apprenticeship model, just
Yeah.
figure out how people are living their lives. What do they actually do on a daily basis? And if you see yourself in that role,
Or take a gap year,
or
or, you know, one of
yeah,
Naval's heuristics is like, go ask your parents and your friends what about the things you did naturally when you were like 10 to 13. Like,
yeah,
what were your interests pre-puberty before everything got like weird and crazy and
yeah,
hormonal and status oriented? And like that sometimes holds a great clue.
yeah,
Or what do you do nights and weekends? Or what 10% of your job do you actually really like? You know, sometimes it's like, I've talked to people who are like, I'm an engineer, but I really love talking to people. And like, it's like, turns out they actually really wanted to be a salesperson.
yeah,
Like they were energized by talking to people, and
yeah.
they had a gift for being a salesperson. They just sort of ended up on a different career track. And
Yeah.
that sort of self-honesty about, you know, which things you're really interested in and what you find energizing.
That's a fair point. I just started thinking back to when I was piling on Fs in my engineering program and had to had to question what I was naturally good at in my childhood. And I was like, oh well, I did debate club, drama I sucked at, speeches I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
But I did like talking. Both of them is like theatrics talking. So what's like a combination of it that might make sense?
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
Maybe you were like self-sabotaging. You were like denying that you had any talent because your interest wasn't there.
No, but I just naturally was still continuously gravitating. So I was like,
Yeah.
you know, maybe I should explore that more. And here we are.
Here we are.
Here we are. So that makes sense. Another thing that I think like which Elon mentioned I find really interesting is if you don't push for radical breakthroughs, you won't get radical outcomes.
Love it. Love it.
Don't assume progress is not guaranteed. Going back to our earlier conversation around, or are we getting out of the stagnation era? I think it would be um I think it's not safe to assume that it's guaranteed. And we see how like these meta technological cycles change every almost 2 years. We were discussing this over lunch.
Yeah.
Attention is scarce, and you know, whether that's attention for capital or builders, attention is just a scarce commodity, right? In general. So I think you have to remember and reinforce this idea that radical breakthroughs just don't happen.
Yeah, and to some extent that's downstream of his like first principles thinking, which is like how good is possible? What's the most optimal possible outcome? And operating within these incredible constraints. Like there's a story in the algorithm book that I think is really good. So they had a bottleneck around customer service. And so the first order answer is like, we need more service centers. It's like, all right, how many more? 100 more. And they cost, you know, 3 million each to build.
Mm.
And so it's a $300 million solution to like solve this customer service problem. And Elon's like, no, like, I wish that could be the solution, but we don't have $300 million to build service centers, and we don't have 2 years to like build them. So come up with something better. And so like the first principles version, the radical breakthrough that happened is like, all right, we have no capital, but we want to do the best possible thing for the customer. So what are we going to do? And they had fleet vehicles that had like nicks or what weren't sellable for whatever reason. And so the technicians would take those vehicles to the customer's house. And it turns out like 90+% of issues were solvable by a remote technician with tools that could fit in the trunk at the customer's house. And so the customer, they would like build this remote, like at home service thing, not out of like a spark of genius that this is worth any amount of investment, but like that the plan A obvious thing, which the whole rest of the industry was doing, didn't work. And they couldn't do it. And so this radical breakthrough came from both a radical customer orientation and a really unfortunate set of constraints, but it forced this breakthrough. And I mean, SpaceX is absolutely full of these stories of like, you know, hell or high water, we're going to make the reusable thing work because that's the radical breakthrough. And I know everybody thinks that that's impossible, but that's the bar that we're going to hold. And that's a really hard thing to sort of to lead through something that's impossible, but it's also an inspiring thing, which is how I think he assembled some of the team that he was able to.
Another interesting SpaceX story is the fact that he did a feasibility study before starting it.
Yeah, I love the feasibility study.
And I think that's like a big takeaway for entrepreneurs thinking about, uh, or who are in the process of thinking about what to work on, what to pursue. Um, there was like, I think you mentioned there's like somewhat 3 years in between when he like came, like first had the idea, and then after the PayPal exit, when he finally gets to it, there's some time in between. And sometimes like these great ideas do take time.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the SpaceX was an emergent vision, right? His original vision was to increase the budget for NASA. And he actually, ironically, was going to do a philanthropic mission. So he was just going to donate
Oh, interesting.
$100 million.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah, that was.
Wow.
You know, the first thing he did with the PayPal windfall was like, I'm going to
Figure out how to donate to NASA.
No,
Oh.
he was trying to spend money to
Oh.
send a plant, like a tiny mini greenhouse, to Mars. Because he looked up, NASA had no plans to go to Mars. And he's like, well, maybe I could do it. Classic Elon, right? So he's like, I'm going to buy a rocket and I'm going to send it to Mars and I'm going to invent a little greenhouse that'll like grow a plant on Mars and send back an image of the first life on Mars. And that will like, it'll be like the moon landing. It'll catalyze this great interest in space and travel, and it'll get NASA a bigger budget. And this was at the inflection point, like NASA was still kind of doing great things. I mean, 25 years ago, they were kind of fresh off the space shuttle. We were heading in the wrong direction, but there was still a lot of hope for the organization. And what he found in trying to pursue that was that you just couldn't buy like a reasonably economic rocket. Like the rocket launch market was stymied, stuck, stagnating, and not working. And so that's when he started the feasibility study. So he pulled together all these engineers from all the different launch vehicles that had been designed over the past few years. And he's like, you know, is a radical breakthrough possible? Let's just clean sheet of paper. Let's do some math. Let's see what's possible. And so the feasibility study was concluding that that there was something was possible there right around the same time that the PayPal sale completed. And so he was like, this is, you know, kismet. And that's when he moved to LA and actually sort of started SpaceX in earnest with the vision that we have today, which is, you know, to directly tackle the cost of getting cargo into space.
The PayPal exit story and that entire PayPal journey is very interesting on its own. And what a lot of people forget is that what is now known as the PayPal Mafia, there's a lot of conflict. So no conflict, no interest, right?
Yeah.
That's not how they started out. The fact that he was, forced out of the company by who later, like I think he mentions that, you know, Peter Thiel and David Sachs were involved in like sort of deciding that he's not the best person to be CEO or run the company, but he doesn't hold it against them. And they end up having an amicable relationship, and he works hard on it. And then how that like plays out over his lifetime is so interesting, where Founders Fund is the only investor that or like one of the first investors that comes in to save SpaceX, and over again how that plays out, where, you know, I think David Sachs was advising on the X takeover. He was there, and they've all like sort of stuck together, backed each other, but that's not how it started out. So the fact that they were able to work through that is so interesting to me.
Yeah, Jimmy Soni wrote an incredible and deeply researched book about the PayPal story called The Founders, and it is fascinating. I mean, it's because it all happens in like 3 years of like crazy early thing, and all of the characters in that book go on to do incredible things. I mean, so many more than you think, right? Like, you know, Max Levchin, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, those are kind of the headline like figures. But yes, David Sachs, roll off both of the founders of YouTube.
Keith Rabois. Yeah.
Reid Hoffman, maybe?
Reid Hoffman, yes.
Like, it is an unbelievable kind of period of time
Yeah.
and an unbelievable story. And yeah, the fact that they sort of started off as totally different visions and then iterated towards this like deadlock, bitter rivalry where they competed brutally with each other. And then they merged and raised money right before the dot-com crash, and then navigated through the dot-com crash, sort of in this like guerrilla battle with eBay where they had to like exist within their platform, but like in this almost adversarial way. And then they ended up getting bought by eBay after multiple rounds of back and forth. And yeah, Elon got ousted by Peter, but became still a good, like, rebuilt that relationship. It is like a real roller coaster. It's so cool. And there's interesting lessons like to be learned about, you can tell from that book. And there's only, I think, one chapter about PayPal stories in the Book of Elon. But the zoomed in view, you can tell a lot about how Elon learned go to market and the sort of the parallel gestation strategy. There's just a lot of DNA. Well, one of the things, I mean, PayPal, X.com was Elon Musk's company originally that he started, that merged into with Confinity to form PayPal. And when he started that, his vision was to be like this global everything finance app, which interestingly, he's like using the name, revisiting it, and kind of going through the same thing now 30 years later. But his launch strategy will be very familiar to like Tesla and SpaceX. And so he had to kind of, the same thing to do is to take 3 years to sequentially sort of get regulatory permits, build a product, and then build integrations. And that's how almost everybody would do it, because each one of those, you risk wasting 2 years if you can't get the preceding step done. And Elon's move is like, nope, we're doing all 3 in parallel. We're going to sprint through them all. It's going to be chaos, but we're going to launch in 1 year instead of 3. And, we'll take the risk that one of those falls through because it'll shorten the overall timeline. And so this ability to put parallel elements in gestation that's one of the great kind of stories of that. And he does that over and over again. But you also see him like calling surges and demanding crazy things. He decided to launch, I think they launched their debit card or debit product on the Thanksgiving weekend. And so he was like demanding that all his engineers come in from Thanksgiving, leave their families, come like coding marathon because we're launching on Saturday. Why are we launching on Saturday on Thanksgiving? Doesn't matter. Like Elon decided it. Like that's what is going to compress the timeline. This is what's going to get the most done. Like get in here. So that kind of work hard, play hard, all in nature. He's been doing that from the very, very, very early days. Which is why it's like, it's authentic to him. Like I don't put this forth to be like, he could have been anybody and this is what he decided is the best way to form these companies. And it's not to say that everybody should operate this way. It's just to say that like he leaned into him.
Yeah.
And is very authentically this kind of like maniacal, like all in surge driven guy. And if you are that, hell yeah, like lean into it. You can make like an amazing culture out of that. But there's a million ways to win, and the one that's natural to you is probably going to be the one that sets you up best for success. This is just meant to be a collection of potential mental models, methods, mindsets, not a blueprint that you should contort yourself to follow.
There's probably a whole book that can be written about the feasibility studies that did not work out.
Yeah.
And
this is actually, the feasibility studies is a pattern that I notice in great founders also. So the best investment to date of our entire portfolio is a founder that met with me quarterly for 2 years before he actually initiated his fundraise. And he was like mapping the maze, meeting everybody, analyzing the things, building the relationships, setting up all the dominoes so that when he went, they are one of the fastest moving companies.
I love that. Yeah.
It is unbelievable how fast
Think
they're
long
moving.
And hard about what you're going to do and then all in.
Yes. And it's because he's got those years of like low
compounding
to no burn relationships.
Knowledge.
And so he knows exactly who to pull in and when, and like in an extremely complex and heavily regulated, challenged industry where time is massively of the essence and mistakes have huge consequences, like, physically and financially. And I hope when that book is written about that company, much attention is paid to the years that founder spent studying and mapping the maze.
I've observed the same thing across a lot of the founders, especially in frontier industries or like in these very complicated problems that I've interviewed. They would spend on average 2 to 3 years
Yeah.
really solving, ideating on the problem and trying to figure out how to solve it in many different ways. Like it, founding a company ends up being the last sort of solution to that
When
problem.
it's inevitable, and
when it becomes inevitable,
and you're like, I'm stupid not to do this.
Yeah.
The stars align. It's Matt Lozak of Allo Atomics. I don't know why I was like
Huh.
cagey about it. I was like, as soon as I was like, oh yeah, no, we should definitely like.
That's awesome.
No, it's an unbelievable company.
And Austin based where we're recording. So
yeah, I drove by their factory on the way from the airport.
That is like an interesting mental model for approaching problems. I think like for people looking to be on entrepreneurial pursuits, and even if not, I think it's such a great way to find what you want to do, which is I think you talked about earlier that you could go shadow people, and that is often not like we live in this instant gratification era, and these are not 3-month long endeavors. These are probably 2-year long endeavors, and you should maybe think of life that way.
But it's interesting, like when you see everyone's actions, especially your own, through the lens of ego or status, it's much easier to see through some of those things. So it is much more high status and satisfying to the ego to tell people that you're starting a company. It is not particularly impressive to say I'm conducting a 2-year feasibility study. That sounds like you don't know what the fuck you're doing.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're just making things up or covering for the fact that you're not doing anything, when in fact it could be you're a seed that's growing roots so that you can grow a trunk much more quickly. And the courage to,
the growing roots part is not sexy.
It's not sexy, and it doesn't give you, it doesn't sound
visible.
good in a bar, and it doesn't sound good on a date, and it's not visible. But, you find if you can appropriately sort of analyze. I
love that analogy. It's underground. It's literally underground. The roots are growing.
Yes. It looks like it's not doing anything. But it, in the long run, the roots are what give you that stability and what enable you to grow more quickly. Like it's a very appropriate analogy. But if you can learn to evaluate your actions through against the bias that your ego wants, you'll find that, almost always that first instinct that the ego wants is the inverse of the long-term best thing for you. And I don't know, I found that to be a very useful heuristic, both for my own actions and also for seeing who has that sort of ability to zoom out and put the mission ahead of the short-term perception.
Well, Eric, true to one of the takeaways from the book, do useful things. I think we've been able to hopefully discuss some fraction of useful ideas that you've taken 5 years and poured your heart into curating in the book. So one, thank you for doing that. Thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts on some of those. What is something anyone listening to this podcast can do for you?
Read the book. do it for yourself. Don't do it for me. Like I said, at the top, we make all our books available for free. I just believe in spreading good ideas and installing them into people's heads. So making them freely available. If there's a wonderful and ambitious 12 to 18-year-old in your life, please give them a copy of these books.
Where can they find it?
ElonMuskBook.org is the most recent one. eJorgenson.com has all my books, all my newsletters, the fund, everything that I do is there.
Well, I hope to have you back on and we can go deeper on Naval.
Yes. Anything you want. This is super fun. Thank you.